The miracles of Moses. Thousands of years ago, along the Nile River basin on the African continent, a powerful civilization called Egypt blossomed in dazzling splendor. Towering pyramids seemed to pierce the sky, and magnificent temples were built, while the king known as Pharaoh wielded absolute power like a god. Behind the glory of this brilliant civilization, a deep darkness unseen by most people was spreading. Within that darkness, the painful story of one people was quietly beginning. Long ago, a great famine struck the land of Canaan, and the people of Israel fled to Egypt to survive. Through God's wondrous providence, Joseph had become governor of Egypt and welcomed them. At first, they settled in this fertile land as honored guests, warmly received, but as time passed, the situation slowly yet surely began to change. A new dynasty arose in Egypt, ruled by kings who did not know Joseph. The new Pharaoh looked upon the growing and strengthening Israelites with suspicion and fear. The thought that they might join Egypt's enemies and threaten the nation spread through the palace. That fear soon took shape as a policy of harsh oppression. The Israelites were suddenly forced into hard labor and reduced to the miserable status of slaves. Under the scorching sun, they baked bricks all day and carried heavy stones, sacrificed for Pharaoh's building projects. With their sweat and blood, Egypt's power grew stronger each day, while their own freedom faded away. Yet deep in their hearts, a small flame of hope continued to burn. Even under brutal labor, the number of Israelites continued to increase. Feeling an even greater threat, Pharaoh finally issued a horrifying order to throw every newborn Hebrew boy into the Nile River. It was a cruel attempt to erase an entire generation and destroy the future of the community. They were called Hebrews, meaning people who crossed over, a people of Israel bound to God by covenant. In that dark time, a son was born to a couple named Amram and Jochebed among the Israelites. This child would one day become Moses, the great leader who would guide Israel to freedom. Moses had an eloquent older brother, Aaron, and a wise and courageous sister, Miriam. Even under the threat of death, this family trusted God and resolved to protect the child's life. After hiding the baby for 3 months, Jochebed could no longer conceal him. She carefully wove a small basket from reeds and sealed it so that water could not seep in. Then she gently laid her beloved child inside and set the basket among the reeds of the Nile River. This was not an act of despair, but a choice of faith that entrusted the child's life completely to God. From a distance, Miriam watched silently, following the basket's fate. Just then, the Egyptian princess came down to the river with her attendants to bathe and rest. The faint cry of a baby drifting from the reeds stopped the princess in her tracks. A moment that would change the destiny of an entire people was quietly drawing near. The princess found the crying baby in the basket and immediately recognized him as a Hebrew child. Yet compassion rose first in her heart. At that moment, Miriam bravely stepped forward and offered to find a Hebrew nurse. Amazingly, that nurse turned out to be the child's own mother, Jochebed. After the child was weaned, the princess formally adopted him as her own son. She named him Moses, a name meaning drawn out of the water. Moses grew up protected as a prince in the royal palace of Egypt. yet his life was already unfolding within God's special plan. As a prince, Moses received the finest education in learning, politics, and military arts. At the same time, through his mother who had nursed him, he learned about the God of the Hebrews. Between the splendor of palace life and the suffering of his oppressed people, a deep inner conflict grew within him. That conflict became the seed that would one day change the direction of his life completely. One day, Moses witnessed an Egyptian official brutally abusing a Hebrew slave. Unable to restrain his anger, he killed the Egyptian and hid the body in the sand. When this act became known, Pharaoh sought to kill Moses. Moses abandoned palace life and his royal status and fled to the wilderness of Midian. In the wilderness of Midian, Moses married Zipporah, the daughter of the priest Jethro, and lived as a shepherd. Far from the splendor of the palace, his life became quiet and demanding. Moses spent 40 long years in the wilderness, reflecting on his life. This time was God's preparation, leading him toward a new calling. One day, while leading his flock, Moses came to Horeb, the mountain of God. A bush was burning fiercely, yet it was not consumed. From the flames, God himself called out to Moses. He was given a holy mission to lead the suffering Israelites out of bondage. Moses honestly told God that he was not eloquent and felt inadequate. God then said that his brother Aaron would go with him and help him. When Moses received God's words, Aaron would speak them before the people. In this way, the two brothers supported each other and carried out their God-given mission together. Following God's command, Moses and Aaron returned to Egypt after 40 years. They stood boldly before Pharaoh and clearly declared, "Let my people go." But Pharaoh stubbornly refused their demand. The suffering of the Israelites only grew worse. God sent 10 plagues upon all of Egypt, one after another. The waters of the Nile turned to blood, and frogs, gnats, and swarms of flies filled the land. Livestock died, painful boils broke out, and hail and locusts destroyed crops and fields. At last, after deep darkness covered the land, the most fearful plague came, and every firstborn child died. After the 10th plague, Pharaoh finally allowed the Hebrew people to leave Egypt. By day, a pillar of cloud went before them, showing the way and shielding them from the burning sun. By night, a pillar of fire appeared, lighting the path through the dark wilderness. This was clear evidence that God was always with them, personally guiding their journey. As time passed, Pharaoh deeply regretted letting the Hebrew people go. He personally led a vast Egyptian army, including 600 elite chariots, in pursuit. From across the wilderness, the thunder of chariot wheels and pounding hooves drew ever closer. Fear and anxiety once again spread across the faces of the Hebrew people. Ahead of them lay the endless Red Sea, while behind them the Egyptian army blocked the way completely. With no place left to escape, the Hebrews were seized by terror and turned their complaints against Moses. Trembling with fear, they cried out, asking why they had been brought into the wilderness to die. At that moment, as hope seemed to collapse, the entire community was shaken by doubt and despair. Moses cried out to the people, telling them not to be afraid. God commanded him to raise his staff and stretch out his hand toward the sea. All night long, a powerful east wind began to blow. The waters of the Red Sea parted to the left and right, and a path impossible by human strength began to open. The waters stood tall on both sides like solid walls, and a path of dry ground appeared in the middle of the sea. The Hebrews moved forward step by step, leading the elderly, the children, and even their livestock. Fear and awe were mingled together, yet their steps did not stop. This march of faith continued through the long night toward the far shore. The Egyptian army did not stop, but followed them into the divided sea. Chariots and horses raced between the waters, but sank into the muddy ground as wheels came off and chaos spread. At last, when Moses stretched out his hand again at God's command, the waters returned all at once. The chariots and army were completely covered, and not one of them survived, bringing the pursuit to a final end. On the far shore, the Hebrews finally confirmed their complete freedom. They were no longer slaves of Egypt, but a people in covenant with God. As time passed, the community made its way toward the promised land of Canaan and built a new life. Under God's faithful guidance, fear faded away, and a peaceful new life began.